Have you had a good week? I have, and I tell you why. I got some really lovely, kind messages and comments about last week's episode, which made me really happy, and I just want to start this episode by saying thank you. Okay, let's dive right in. Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Everything EFL, a podcast about language teaching. I'm not an expert on the subjects I choose to talk about, but I've been around and I know some stuff. Credit will be given where possible, in the episode or in the show notes. I hope you're keeping well. I'm just going to dive right in. So just before Christmas, I asked some of my followers to literally ask me anything. Svetlana at edvets_English asked about strategies to teach non-verbal conventions to students. So we're talking about gestures, smiles, eye contact, head shakes and stuff like that, which is a really great question for a number of reasons. I think it's something that maybe we neglect, but culturally it's extremely important to read signals and respond correctly. Just as an example, there was a listening in a course book, probably English File or Cutting Edge, one of those. An English woman was talking about meeting her husband's Russian family for the first time. And in England, you know, we like to smile a lot. It's a sign of friendliness. But the Russian family thought she was mad because they just don't use smiles as freely as we do over here. So, you know, just little things like that I think are really useful for students to pick up on, especially if they are planning on maybe going on holiday or working in the future in an English-speaking country. On a linguistic note, there are lots of verb phrases to be learnt. For example, fold your arms, nod your head, shake your head. Lots of nice little verb phrases and collocations there with parts of the body. Brilliant for plurals, for general facts and pronouns. So, for example, in Turkey, they fold their arms. I mean, I just made that up. I don't know if that's true. I don't know why or when they fold their arms, but you get the idea. So back on topic. Many non-verbal signals have lots of different meanings in different cultures. They can be interpreted in completely different ways in different cultures. So the first thing I would say to Svetlana is just do a bit of research on Google first of all, the differences between country A and country B. It's also a big topic with a lot of language, so narrow it down. What do you want your lesson to be about specifically? Is it going to be general gestures from a country or rude gestures to avoid making in a particular country? Something that may be non-offensive in your country but is quite offensive in the target country. Alternatively, reach out on Instagram to a teacher who's a native speaker of that country. Maybe they can help you. It's a brilliant way to keep your connections going on Instagram, which is just such a lovely community for teachers. It really is. So my recommendation is to start the lesson with maybe a video as a warmer. I looked on YouTube, and I'll put this on the show notes. There's a video called American Hand Gestures in Different Cultures, 7 Ways to Get Yourself into Trouble Abroad. So students will get the idea that even simple hand gestures may result in a troublesome encounter, shall we say, in the wrong country. So one of the examples is a thumbs up gesture in the USA means great or fantastic or fab, but in other countries it could be very offensive. So you could finish with a question, do these hand gestures mean the same thing in our language? What's the difference? Great. What would happen if someone did this in our country? How would you react? Here's an interesting thought. Many students focus on the words when they're doing, for example, a listening. They're concentrating so hard to understand the words, they're missing the non-verbal cues. Like if you think about it, how many listening exercises are purely audio rather than audio-visual? So if you can start using more videos, why don't you do that? A lot of textbooks now have video lessons, which is brilliant. There are a few things you can do here. So after the initial listening comprehension, you could focus on watching silently to observe the body cues and have some questions prepared. Don't just say, you know, what are the differences or what do you notice? It's just too broad a question. So again, narrow it down. How close are they standing? Why did she put her palm up? Can you remember what she was saying as she did this? Look at her face. You're really narrowing in on those nonverbal cues. Or you could watch it on silent before you listen, and you could ask questions again. Do you think the scene is a friendly or an unfriendly one? How do you know? What are they doing to make you reach that conclusion? Another idea would be cultural comparisons. You could do this in a couple of ways. If you could find two videos, one from your target culture and one from your own culture, for example, having an encounter with a friend in a cafe, again, have some questions prepared. Can students notice the difference in the nonverbal cues? If that's too difficult to find, maybe you could use a video lesson from your book where they're, for example, sitting in a cafe in England, and then get your students to act out the scene for their own culture with the differences, and then they can talk about the comparisons there. I think that would be a really nice interactive lesson. Again, make sure you have questions prepared to help your students rather than just asking broader questions like, what's different? Things like, are they leaning forward or are they leaning backward? What is the distance between the men and the women? How do they greet each other? What are they drinking and eating? I mean, there are so many things you could look at here, and it's just such a lovely way to incorporate culture into your lessons in a very natural, non-invasive way. As a homework task, you could give questions to your students. For example, choose a topic like cafe culture or what people their age do at weekends. You could divide your groups into, say, 4 or 5, depending on how large your class is. You could have one group researching, Canada, another one researching England or something like that. They go home, they Google it, they get the answers to your questions. Next lesson, they do like a jigsaw feedback where they exchange information from every country that's researched, and then you can have a nice whole class feedback session. What did you find out? Is it different from how we do it here? Another really nice activity. It's very, very simple. This works for a mixed nationality class. You could get them sitting or standing in a circle. It's kind of a non-verbal game, so the teacher leads it, but the students find it really good fun. Basically, you ask students, how do you say this without using words? So, for example, hi, I'll call you, yes, no, I don't know, great, I'm not happy. There are a million things. I need the toilet, anything you can think of where they're going to have to use visual cues rather than spoken cues. And you do get little differences, and it's really nice to see that. And you can see them looking around in the circle and laughing, and, there's sometimes the odd surprise. And it's just a nice, again, very natural, non-invasive way just to look at those differences and celebrate them. Okay, on to the next one. So, Sabby from High Street English asked, should young learners be asked to focus on grammar mistakes? Okay, so I'm just going to start by being honest. This is not my area of expertise, but it did give me a chance to do a bit of research. So, youngsters have a tendency to hate being wrong. Even some adults, that's sometimes cultural. They don't like losing face. But I think it is necessary to correct them in order to avoid fossilization, because these habits are so hard to break as they get older. Research has shown actually that most kids are receptive to on-the-spot correction, but I think the trick is how it is administered. You have to avoid that embarrassment and fear of making mistakes. My suggestion would be, and I do this with my niece, I do little maths lessons with her, and she's one of those kids who hates being wrong. She doesn't like losing games. She doesn't like getting the wrong answer. You can see as soon as she knows she's got something wrong, her face screws up, her body language changes. What I just do is I'm just as casual as possible with my language and my tone of voice. I don't stop dead in my tracks. I don't skip a beat. You keep going. Business as usual, avoid negative words and just keep going. Don't say no, just say, okay, right, here we go. Here's a few examples. Do you mean I do or I did? And then elicit why with a simple because, and they hopefully will go, oh, because it's past, If they don't, maybe invite the rest of the class. Could anybody help? I always say that. Can anybody help? Use that language. Or you could just sort of question them. Again, careful with your tone of voice. If they say, I go to the park, I go? Are you sure? And if they just give you a blank face, give them the option again. Are you sure? I go or I went? What do you think? And then always finish with praise. Great, good job, well done. Another thing you can do is use visual cues. Now, this isn't possible for every mistake, but you know those kind of standard mistakes that always come up, like third person or plural s, or it do instead of it does, that kind of thing, or past or present. Have flashcards on your desk with maybe a giant S on it, or past or present question mark. Wave it around, dance around with it. My friend used to teach years ago, and she said she would dance around with a giant S in her hand every time she heard somebody, neglect that third person S. Again, you're just injecting humour into the class. You're not making a big deal of it. You're turning it into a bit of fun. Everybody can laugh. Everybody finds common ground, I think, when they make the same mistakes as well. If you're using this sort of element of casualness and humour, students don't see the making mistake as sort of an oh no moment. Sometimes I've noticed that if you just slowly reach for the pile of flashcards on your desk, that's enough sometimes. Students know what it means. They know you're reaching for something. Oh, I made a mistake. What is it? They start thinking, and sometimes they can correct themselves, which is brilliant. Another one is echoing. Have you tried this before? So, for example, if your student says, I go to the park yesterday, you go to the park? And stress that wrong word. You go to the park? Use your face. Rub your chin. You go to the park? Again, a little bit of humour in there. And then hopefully they'll realise the mistake. Another thing you can do is recast. If the student says, I go to the park yesterday, you say, oh, you went to the park. Okay, how was it? And then hopefully the student will repeat it. If you think the student has picked up on the fact you've corrected them, brilliant. If they haven't, ask them to repeat it. The main thing, though, is, gentle, humour, casual, business as usual, no drama. These would be my key words here. But you can also mix it up a little bit and do some delayed error correction. So make a note of some of those little errors and then later turn it into a game. I think this is probably good for less common mistakes. Give them a mini whiteboard or some scrap paper. Even better would be flip chart paper on the wall plus a marker. You write an incorrect sentence on the board, give students a time limit to rewrite it. Or you could say, the first group to finish, put your hand up or hold up the piece of paper or whatever, and then introduce some points for a competitive element. Everybody loves competition. Doesn't matter whether they're children or adults. Okay, Sabby, I hope that helped. On to the next one. Sarah from elamodelteacher. She asked me, do you have a simplistic way of teaching students a method to capitalise the I pronoun? The simple answer is not really, but after some careful thought, here goes. If I is the main capitalisation problem, how can you make it stand out, I suppose? I mean, there are, as you know, lots of reasons why you may capitalise a word, but it seems here that the issue is the capital I. I suppose some visual cues again would be good. You could have it on a poster on your wall, and that way you can remind the students before they write and also after they write when they're doing their checking. Point to it. It's always there to point at. Another thing I like to do just in general with writing is to write what I call a writing checklist on the board, or maybe on a piece of paper that you can hand out between two students that they can look at. So when they finish writing, they have to either check their own work or maybe swap with a partner and check their partner's work. So on your writing checklist, have 4 or 5 typical mistakes that students always make. For example, the third person S or the plural S. In this case, the capital I. Stick that on the list. And they have to go through their writing and they have to look at that list, and that gives them something really concrete to work on, which I think is very important because I think it's quite hard, especially for lower level students, just to check someone's writing. So give them something to check against and include that problem I on that list. That might help. Another idea, especially if they're younger, is could you have like a little phrase or a song that they can learn or memorize, and you can get them to say at the appropriate moment, like I don't know, I'm not very good at this sort of thing. Like, I am important and important things are capitalised, or something a little less shit than that. I don't know. Use your imagination. I've included in the show notes a website with some capitalisation games if you're interested, guys. Everything I mention will be on the show notes. Another idea is a game where you could read a sentence aloud slowly and students stand up when they hear a word that should be capitalised. I think this is a great game. It's interactive, it's easy to prepare, And in this case, you can include loads of capital I's in the sentence as well. Also, I think the error correction game I mentioned earlier could work, writing a sentence on the board with capitalization errors instead of grammar errors, and then students rewrite it in groups. I think that will work very well as well. Any kind of element or fun or competition is always good when reviewing actual, typical or potential mistakes. So I hope that helps. So the lovely Erin.myres from the Educator's Mindset podcast sent me just a few general questions. The first one is, what's your favourite age to teach? I'm not going to lie, guys, it's adults. I have nothing but admiration for teachers who connect with kids and teens. It's just not for me, to be honest. I like young adults. They're on the cusp of learning so much about life. They're kind of hungry for it. And then you can introduce critical thinking activities and really introduce interesting subject matter they can discuss. They're really into collaborations because they're very social at that age, lots of project work and stuff like that. So yeah, that would be my favourite. Her second question is, how long have you been teaching? Well, I got my TESOL certificate in St Mary's College in Twickenham in 2004. I've been a teacher, I've been an assistant director of studies, I've run a junior program. I didn't teach for a year when I was living in the USA in 2011. My qualifications weren't quite enough to work in a school or college environment, and there were no language schools near me because I was in quite a small town in Northern California. So I worked in a cafe and a medical beauty spa. So while I missed teaching like mad, my skin was glowing. And her other question is, what is the hardest and easiest skill to teach? This is quite a tough question. I suppose the hardest is writing. One, because students don't particularly like it. Sometimes it's quite hard to get them engaged. They fear it. If you leave writing for homework, they often don't do it. I'm a big fan of actually doing writing in class, collaborations, or as I mentioned before, introducing an element of error correction where they swap each other's work and look at each other's work together. I find this can be quite useful, and it gives you a good idea of what they know, what they don't know, what they think they know. You have to find ways to engage students, and a lot of the time the subject matter isn't very interesting in your course books, like, write a letter of complaint. How often are they going to have to do this in real life? How can we make it interesting? But that's something that I really need to work on as well. It's down to me to make it more engaging for my students, I think. In terms of the easiest, I suppose speaking and vocab, they have their ups and downs because it's that lots of mistakes are made. But on a sort of a creative note, there are so many ways, so many scenarios, to sort of practice it. And, teachers are creative. I think that's what makes good teachers good teachers. They love creating things and coming up with good, engaging ideas. And the English language, it's so rich. And I just love teaching words and phrases and collocation. So I think vocab and speaking would be my answer there. Finally, Pam Pfeiffer Fahy asked me about future forms, but that's huge. So I'm going to address that in a 2-part podcast. I started sort of preparing for it and I realised that there was a lot there. So if you're interested in future forms and a few ideas to review them and practice them, keep your eyes and ears out for that one. Okay, so that's it for this week. Thank you very much to my Insta followers for contributing to this episode. I actually really enjoyed doing the research and answering these questions. So yeah, I hope you get something out of that, guys, and I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Everything EFL on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and engage with me and my followers. If you have a suggestion, idea, or any feedback, my email is on the show notes. Finally, and most importantly, share this episode on social media and tell your colleagues. Share the love. Bye.